Hey guys, welcome to my shop. Got the motor out of the Camaro today. Had a long year of racing it hard. A lot of hard races on it. We are going to take it over to the workbench and we're going to dissect it. We're going to take it apart. We're going to look inside. We're going to see what all's going on. See how well it all held up. And we'll discuss some pretty cool tech things about the motor when we take it apart. Maybe help some people that are thinking about doing something like this in the future. Maybe you'll learn some motor stuff from me. Maybe you guys can teach me some motor stuff in the comments. So the first thing we're going to look at is there any play in the blower, because we run a crank drive. You know, it's basically a direct drive system here. So I'm going to put my hand here on the coupler from the crank and the gearbox, and I'm going to go up here and put my other hand on the impeller, and I'm going to just turn it back and forth a little bit to see if there's any play at all. And that will tell me if the gearbox internally in the blower is in good shape, and it is. There's no play whatsoever in that. So that's a good sign. That's the first thing that we look at, and that's the first thing that, you know, you can do that while it's in the car too, but just kind of giving you guys a little tip on one of the things that I look for immediately. You see where I drilled lightning holes in here and notched this out, and I cut the angles off of these pieces. Just extra lightning throughout the blower mount. I made my own standoff deal here to make the gear drive bolt to the front of the block. It was a lot of work, but I'm glad I did it. It made the whole assembly lighter and I believe stronger the way that I did it, and I haven't had any failures from it all year, not one, so maybe it worked out good. All right, everybody asked me how much the blower and the gear drive and everything hanging off the front of this motor weighs. To be honest, not really sure. I have an idea. Now, what we're gonna do is, we're gonna figure that out right now. So, let's go from kilograms to pounds, and let's see if I'm strong enough to pick this up.
What's it say?
94 and a half, let's call it 95 pounds. So, it's pretty heavy. And that is sticking way off the front of the motor too. So, just to give you an idea of what this weighs, it's a little more than I thought it would be. Yeah, so if you ever watch the Top Fuel guys or anybody in NHRA, they take their motors apart in between rounds and they get them back together. And one trick that my dad taught me was you glue one side of your gaskets and you grease the other side. And every time you take your intake off, you put grease back on these. And then if you need to take it off quick and not damage your expensive gaskets that you take so long to trim and form to your intake ports, you grease the top of them. You can pop your intake on and off many times before you ever damage a gasket.
That's pretty genius.
Okay, so I remember the very first time I worked on a shaft rocker system, and you could see these shafts where they go all the way through these two rockers, and it's got 3 bolts holding it down. That's what dictates that it's a shaft rocker, and it all bolts to the same steel pedestal here that goes all the way across. It adds a ton of rigidity so that there's no flex in the Valvetrain up here. And I'll never forget the first one I worked on. I didn't realize that if you don't turn the motor over to where there's lash in each rocker, you have to have lash in each one or it'll actually bend the shaft as you're trying to take it off because the valve spring pressure is so strong. So if I tried to take this one off that's pushing down on the valve right now, and I took these 3 out, it would bend this shaft, and it cost me quite a bit of money. And I remember my dad laughing at me and saying that he taught me that, but I had forgot. These are steel rocker arms, and a lot of people ask me, well, why would you run steel rocker arms? Aren't those heavy? And the answer is, yeah, it can take a very, very, very small amount of RPM out of your engine, but the benefit is there's about a 0 breakage chance when you run a steel rocker. And it's the weight over the tip of the valve that's very important. So here's your valve inside the spring, Okay, and the weight of the rocker out here is what's key. And if you look down in here, bring your camera up here and look down in this view, see where there's cut out? It's a very lightweight rocker, even though it's steel over the valve. So that moment of inertia is much easier to control. Whereas back here in the bulk of the strength of it and above the push rod, that weight doesn't matter near as much.
So the push rods are getting numbered, I see.
Yeah, and the lifters and the rockers. And the reason I do that is because when it goes back together, if I don't change the deck height or the head gasket thickness, and I go back with the motor like it is, then my valve adjustment will almost be perfect right away, and I won't have to go back through and get all of them, you know, it won't take me a long time to adjust my valves. It'll go back in and it'll be damn near spot on. So now we're just going to turn the motor over until we get two of our rockers that have 0 lash. Which I'm trying to get that on cylinder number 1.
Right. So
cylinder
that looks
number
like
1
it.
now has lash on both rockers. So now it's okay to take these bolts out so we don't bend the shaft. I'm also going to go ahead and label this as number 1. And I'm going to label my lifters as number 1. Okay? Then you just take a screwdriver, you can go underneath it, and you put a little bit of a light pry, and I keep all this together and numbered. And I'm going to lay it in order now. And number 1 is going to go over here. I'll slide number 3 down just a hair so that my push rods and my lifters stay for each one. Now I'm going to lay the same push rods out because they can be slightly different in length. So I'm going to make sure that my intake and my exhaust push rods stay with the correct rocker arm. And I'm going to lay that there. And lay this here. I'm going to pull my lifter out of the block.
They're not different weights, are they?
No, there's no different weights. There's no balance to Valvetrain. It's just as simple as trying to get my lash back quickly so it doesn't take me near as long to reassemble the engine. Okay, my intake is shutting, and ooh, a valve spring on the other side pushed the motor, but I'm on compression on the number 5 cylinder. That means I've got lash in both rockers. Means I can go ahead and take those rockers out.
Because compression stroke is valve shut.
Correct. You got to get your valve shut so that there's no valve spring pressure on your rocker arms so that the shafts do not bend. So we're just going to break these loose. By the way, these never use any form of Loctite. They just simply torque down to the correct torque spec using oil. So, number 7 rockers labeled, laid down, push rod, intake, exhaust, laid down, lifter labeled, number 7 cylinder, lifters pulled out of the block. All right, now that we've got all of our rockers off and our push rods out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and take our rocker stand off. So I'm gonna go get my, I believe it's a T50, and we're gonna take all of these bolts out, and we're gonna remove that so that we can get to the head bolts, well, the head studs, the nuts underneath it. So something interesting is the ones over the intake ports, they actually go into the intake port because the intake port's raised up so high on a race engine like this. So I put silicone on them and let them dry overnight before I actually torque these down with silicone on the threads. But on the exhaust side, there's no chance of any oil going down into my intake port, so I don't use any silicone on those. But you can see on this bolt as I get it out that I've used a ultra gray RTV. You can see it at the top. And that kept any oil coming out of from under the valve cover to be able to go down in the port. And if you look down in the port here, you can kind of see at the top of it, up there. Let's see, bring your camera towards me a little more.
I see
that hole? All right, that's where it goes into.
Focus on that.
Yeah.
Right there.
Okay.
You can kind of see there's actually one in both of these for each of those.
Yeah, there
each
it
of
is,
those
right there.
screws. You can see them both from here.
Okay, got my rocker stand loose. Here are the shims that I was telling you about. You have to get right underneath the stands in order to keep the roller tip centered on the valve throughout the travel. So you can see those there. We're gonna lay our stand down in here. And now that side of the motor is now, the Valvetrain is now disassembled.
And then I take it the other side's gonna be the same
Exactly
story.
the same way. Yeah, we'll lapse through that on the video. Okay guys, that's gonna wrap it up for today. I'm tired and I need to get home, see my kids, take care of them, get ready for work tomorrow. Unfortunately, we don't make any money on this. This is just our hobby, but we've got the motor bagged up, everything ready to go for the next time we get to come in here and work on it. And we've learned some stuff, and we're gonna share some stuff with you on what the inside looked like in the next video to follow up, and we're going to show you maybe some improvements that we can make upon it based off of what we saw after dissecting. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thanks.